welcome to a pair of bookends, the book club you can carry anywhere. We are your hosts and hopefully your new bookish pals. I'm Hannah MacDonald.
And I'm Lydia Clare. This episode may contain discussions or descriptions of miscarriage that some of our listeners may find difficult. If you feel affected, please turn off now. This month's book club pick is The Life of the Mind by Christine Smallwood. It's a stunning debut, and we would like to give you a little taste by reading the blurb to you today. An adjunct professor of English in New York with no hope of finding a permanent position, Dorothy is stuck, unable to envision the future or cut ties with the past. What did you call it? She asks herself, when her life stopped developing, but it didn't end. A discomforting glimpse into the head of a brilliant woman on the edge. The Life of the Mind is a piercingly intelligent and darkly humorous novel about endings, of youth, of professional aspiration, of possibility, of the illusion that our minds can ever free us from the tyranny of our bodies.
Christine Smallwood is a critic and journalist from Brooklyn. She has worked as an editor for The Nation, as a contributing editor at Harper's Magazine, and has co-edited and published 4 issues of literary magazine The Crier. Her work has been published by The New Yorker, The Paris Review, N+1 and Vice. She earned a PhD in English at Columbia University and is a fellow at the New York Institute for the Humanities. The Life of the Mind is her debut novel, and we're so excited to be chatting with her today. Christine, welcome to a pair of bookends.
Thank you for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
We're so happy to have you. Just a quick one for our listeners. We would like to apologise that both me and Lydia have a cold, so we're sorry for the way our voices sound today, but...
My voice is about 14 octaves too low. I like the bass level. But yeah, what we like to start with is a little icebreaker, and it's always the question that I ask everyone I meet.
We need to know.
Which is, what are you currently reading?
That's a good question. I'm reviewing the new biography of Shirley Hazzard. So I'm currently reading a lot of Shirley Hazzard.
Amazing. Yeah. And you enjoying it?
Yeah, I am enjoying it. Yeah. I've been reading some of the stories and the novels and blah, blah, blah. So that's what I'm mostly reading right now.
Amazing.
And I'm reading the 3rd volume of Deborah Levy's Real Estate.
Amazing.
Oh, sorry, the third volume of the trilogy, which is called Real Estate.
Which is Real Estate, yeah. Oh, I've only read the first one. How is the third one?
I mean, I like all of them. I think the first one will turn out to be my favorite in the end.
Okay.
But I would recommend all of them.
Yeah, I've got The Cost of Living sat on my shelf. I'm really excited to read it. Yeah, I loved. It's Things I Don't Want to Know, I think, isn't it?
Things I don't want to know.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that. So should we get into the book? Yeah. We were obviously really blown away by the book. It's an incredible debut. So congrats on that.
Thank you. Thank you.
But we wanted to know, and I'm sure our listeners would love to know, what inspired the novel and how did you come to writing it?
So the novel grew out of a short story. So I had, and usually I find writing, usually I find beginning something very, very difficult. So this is the only time in my writing life that I've ever just kind of sat down and written a story that just kind of felt like it came out all at once. And so I kind of wrote what is now like the first 12 or 14 pages of the novel. And I wrote that in 2015. And I just kind of sat down and like wrote this story, and I didn't really understand where it came from. And then I published it as a story. And I sort of thought that that was the end of it. And I was trying to write a collection of short stories. And my collection of short stories was very bad. And the stories were not very good. And it just like wasn't really working as a form for me at that time. And so but so many people had told me that they liked this story when it was published, and people had said that they felt like it was part of a novel or it was somehow unfinished. And at the time I was really like offended by that. And I was like, oh, you think a story about a miscarriage is unfinished? Well, that's the whole point, buddy. But eventually I just felt like maybe like other people could see something I couldn't. And so I went back and just decided to kind of expand it. But all of the components of the story, the miscarriage and the adjuncting and the 2 therapists, that all just kind of like came in together. And then it was very difficult to expand it. And there was like very abject writing process, but at least I kind of knew what I was dealing with, like what the themes were.
How long was the writing process?
When I went back to it, there was like a period in between, like when I wrote the story and then when I went back to it. When I went back to it, it was about 1.5 years until it was done. But there was like I would say like 1.5 years in between.
Wow.
I find that fascinating.
Yeah, me too.
I really love it because we've spoken to a few authors, and a lot of them have said that their novels have come from short stories.
Yeah, quite a few actually. Yeah,
and find it fascinating that sometimes you can't see that as the writer. You can't see that it is meant to be a novel until everyone starts telling you that it is.
I could have read more from her brain. The protagonist, like, I adored and wanted to be inside her brain for longer. Like
I think that people either feel that way or they're like, oh my God, I hate this woman so much. Like, I actually can't even finish it because she's so annoying. So I think it's kind of like, I knew that you would either like really like this or you would really not like it.
No, I loved her, and I think, she was so complex and there was so many elements to her character that were just so kind of fascinating, and a lot of things that you don't always get to see.
Yeah,
you don't get to see all these sides of a person, and just really love being inside her head for a bit.
I'm so glad.
The novel does explore miscarriage quite unashamedly and in quite graphic detail, which I found refreshing, the take on it. Particularly there's a lot of sort of descriptions of sanitary products and the amount of blood and what the blood looks like, and
like the texture and
feel that, even the taste at one point. And I thought that was just, it was so wonderfully done, definitely done. But my question is, what was your decision-making process in terms of, I'm going to tackle this subject, which I think a lot of people would deem as a taboo subject, or a subject that they wouldn't go anywhere near because of the nature of it? What kind of gravitated you towards that?
I mean, I think miscarriage is a funny thing because it's so common. And it does seem like it's being written and talked about a lot more. And like I'll see it in like a movie, like that movie, The Worst Person in the World. Like there's a miscarriage in that movie. Sorry for spoiling, but like it just like I feel like I'm starting to see it more, and maybe that has to do with whose stories are being told, or I don't know. That's not a good example because I think that movie was not written by a woman. But my point is just that I'm noticing more that it's not. I think it was a kind of subject that was maybe hiding in plain sight for a long time.
Yeah.
And now it's starting to come out more. And I guess I just had this feeling that I was unresolved about it. I had a miscarriage, and and I just didn't really find that experience and the way I experienced it represented anywhere. And so it felt like, for me, like wanting to kind of understand it more or think through it more, and feeling that like the idea of it as like a life that had died or a soul that had died that should be grieved didn't feel right, but yet it didn't feel like nothing had happened. And so trying to understand like what the nature of the something is, and like what the nature of your attachment to that thing or fantasy is. I mean, it was like, in terms of the sort of like gnarly details, I don't think I realized at the time like how gnarly they would be perceived as. Like I just got very interested in like really like being very like realist, or like trying to really like capture the detail of it. And then that just kind of like forced me to like I wanted to be precise. But then I think when I was done, I was like, oh, it's actually kind of excessive, but I didn't like set out to be like, how can I be like really like excessive and grotesque? Like that wasn't.
I think it definitely does not come across as excessive to me.
No.
I feel like it feels very just real, like just like wiping yourself on the toilet and seeing blood. Like women do that all the time. We do
every day.
It's like a natural part of our lives all the time. It's something we come into contact with all of the time, and it's so every day, but it's so it's a strange thing, because when you read it, you go, oh, that's shocking. But I do that every day.
Yeah.
I do that all of the time. I have blood and I see it, and it, and why is that so shocking?
I think the thing is that, we've been taught by society that periods and, anything to do with female kind of reproductive health is taboo and dirty. And, we've kind of, been taught that, and it's almost like it's offensive to men. I've had, boys that I was involved with when I was younger, and they, the even mention of a period, they'd be like, oh, what are you talking about that for? Like, it was kind of too much for them. So I think, just seeing it in the book and it being such a visceral thing, you're like, well, yeah, like we do experience these things all the time. And it's only a male audience that we've ever been kind of wary of offending, I guess.
Yeah, and they really like structure how our time is kept, and like that's one of the things that the book is trying to do. So in every chapter of the book, like that time moves in the book based on what's happening with the body. So she's experienced, like, technically the miscarriage occurs before the book begins. And she's kind of dealing with this prolonged like bleeding and discharge, and like that's kind of what's like getting under her skin and like irritating her, is the kind of sense that this thing that is ended won't end. And like I think many of us may feel that way about our periods, or like our menstrual cycle or whatever, and it's just like, wait, what day are we on? Like I thought this ended and now it's back. And like, but there's like the sense that like our bodies kind of keep track of time in this way is interesting to me, and I think makes the kind of like cis female body different than the male body.
Yeah, and I think
absolutely,
I loved how it was this period of 10 days throughout the novel. It was repeated, it's 10 days of bleeding, it's 10 days. And then how the time around her shifts, and it's not 10 days. And I loved the bit where she was talking about the average and how she has to bleed longer so that the average is less. And I was like, you know what? Yeah, I get that. Like, yeah, some people are going to bleed longer.
Yeah.
I thought that was really clever.
Yeah. Well, yeah, because we are told that experiences are supposed to be like, right, averaged out in some way, but that doesn't then map onto who we are.
No.
Yeah.
No.
So a question I wanted to ask, kind of following on from that, your novel, now I'm a little confused about publication dates, because obviously in the book it says 2021, but it was published this year. This cover was published this year, but I think there's another paperback cover version that was also published in the UK a few months ago. So
it came out in the US in March 2021.
Right.
And then it came out in the UK in October of 2021.
Okay.
And then it came out with a different cover just like a month ago.
Right, okay.
Or 2 months ago, something like that.
Perfect.
So it's like the B cover. There's like an A cover and a B cover. And the UK is like a little bit different. Yeah, but it's still Europa.
Yeah, still Europa, yeah.
It's still Europa.
Oh, I love both covers. I really loved the portrait. It was like kind of almost a portrait, wasn't it?
I'm physically attached to it.
So following on, from what we were just speaking about, so obviously your novel was published in 2021 for the first time, and that was kind of before the horrendous kind of outcome of Roe v. Wade, which felt kind of particularly poignant when I was reading the novel, which obviously explores miscarriage and abortion and choice and autonomy surrounding these themes. But do you think if you were to write the novel now, there would be things you would change or maybe write differently, within that context?
Yeah, it's funny. It's like it lands so differently now. And it's definitely, there's like a before the Roe v. Wade or the Roe v. Wade overturning, and then there's an after. So in my book, Dorothy thinks a lot about how her miscarriage is similar to an abortion in that she takes the same medication to trigger the contractions that you would take for an at-home medication abortion, but it's different in this one crucial way, which is like she didn't get to choose to do it. And then that is kind of doubled with an at-home medication abortion that occurs in the book, and that abortion is very casual. it's like very, the woman who has it is very casual about it and is very like matter of fact, and it's not a trauma for her in any way, and it's very easy to do, right? There's nothing in the book about it being difficult to obtain or difficult to do. And I have thought a bit about like what it would mean to write those scenes now. My book is set in New York, but I think that I think that the characters would still have access to those things, but I think that they would be obsessed with talking about what if they didn't, and they would probably be like wanting to like give money to, like anti-forced birth campaigns, and like they might be making phone calls. Like I think like they would be more activated politically than they are. Like there's definitely something sort of like quaintly complacent about their reproductive politics, like, and like privileged, not just in the sense of like race and class, but in the sort of belief the naive belief they have that these options will continue to be available to them. It feels like a totally different moment in history.
I can imagine. But there's the thing of the I don't know what you would describe it as, like the kind of recurring thing where she envisions these like raft children. And that's kind of more of a nod towards like the apocalypse or something, isn't it? So that did make me consider things like privilege and where she was kind of politically at, and kind of her thoughts on the world like around her. Do you know what I mean?
I mean, she's definitely like a character of, I mean, she has tons of white privilege, like first of all, and she definitely has like, I don't want to say like economic comfort, but she's not like poor, and like the book tries to be pretty clear about that, and like she definitely understands that about herself, that she has a kind of stability and like baseline. Like she's not going to be homeless. Like that's not her situation. And like in terms of the adjuncting, in the US you hear horror stories about adjuncts who are on food stamps, like adjuncts who are living in their cars, and like that's absolutely not Dorthe's situation. But I think that she is dealing with whatever the psychological maladies that we all are dealing with at this moment in history, and the sense of climate catastrophe as, both looming, but also really already here. There's a conversation she and her boyfriend have about like the wildfires, and like the people like burning to death in their cars. Like, it's like, that's just like happening right now, It's crazy. It's like, we live in hell. It's so crazy. And so I think that like I think she's trying to kind of work out what the privilege is exactly.
So within everything that we've just spoken about, like, do you feel, because we were kind of talking about this, we were curious, that do you feel a certain type of pressure as an American female author to, I don't know, frame these things in a certain way? Do you feel a certain kind of pressure when writing about these subjects?
I mean, I didn't feel any pressure when writing, because when I was writing, I really just like didn't think people would read the book, and so I tried to like put myself in a kind of I think a lot of people when they're writing do that, and they're kind of surprised at the end, and they're like, oh, it's out there, you read it. Oh, how did you get a copy? So you kind of like pretend that you can kind of say whatever you like. I think if you don't trick yourself in that way, you will just find it impossible to write. I mean, I felt that like leaning into ambiguity was important to me, and so like there's a part of the book when she is talking about like pro-choice politics, and my character like grew up very religious, and so she feels a little alienated from some of the like rhetoric around pro-choice stuff, like particularly related to like she talks a lot about like sonogram pictures and how like she grew up going to like pro-life marches, and this was true for me, like this is autobiographical, where people would like hold up pictures of fetuses in like sonogram pictures and be like, look, it looks like a baby, it's a baby. And then you become an adult and your like liberal pro-choice friends like put their sonogram photo on the refrigerator or post it on social media, and you're like, I don't understand, like this doesn't make sense. And so I think that like, but I feel like that's like an ambiguity that isn't necessarily often expressed, that people feel like in order to be perceived as pro-choice, they have to like not deal with any of the ambiguity about like, what does it mean to be attached to your, fetus, or like, as soon as people are pregnant and they want to be pregnant, they're like, it's a baby, it's like, and it's like, what is it? You're like, anyway, that was something I was interested in. I think it's important to deal with these ambiguities and not be afraid of being on the wrong side of something by exploring them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it's so important to explore those those things as well. And I think what I loved most about the novel was how you were able to emphasize the kind of minutiae of life in really inventive and lovely ways. And I'm going to embarrass you now because I'm going to read a bit out.
Are you okay reading? No, I'm just mean with your throat.
Stop halfway through.
Your voice just gives up.
The $40 hand soap smelled like cedar. Dorothy hoped her casket would smell this good. She washed her hands twice and took a black plastic comb from her bag and combed her hair. Brown hairs filled the sink, fluffy and rising. She swirled them together with a little water, then swirled the wet, matted hair mass over her hair that had fallen on the floor and threw it all away. One recalcitrant strand floated up and worked its way down the side of the trash can. Dorothy wrapped it tight around her finger and pushed the coil off. She used a square of toilet paper to tamp down the trash and left it there, like a blanket for the hairball. I mean, it's just like, you know what? I could listen to her describe her hair and all day I could read pages and pages of it. Like, it sounds hysterical, but I'm like, yeah, give me more.
Can I also just
isn't
say,
that like so much of your day? You know, like pulling hair out of your own head, like
constantly.
Why is it happening all the time? Why is no one?
When you're in the shower, and it's stuck to you everywhere. You're pulling it off yourself.
I know. But like, to have that in the novel, it just makes you feel so connected to it. And again, like we were talking about the sanitary products and the honesty and the the detail of those. And again, it constantly brings us back to the reality of the situation, and almost the mundanity of the situation in ways. So my question,
well, there we go.
I have got a pun. Hang on. Is kind of how do you choose what to focus on in terms of like, this is a moment I want to elaborate on?
That's such a good question. I don't really know. That's like, I've never really thought. That's such a good question. I guess, like, I mean, I'll say, to sort of sideways answer your question, I'll say that I'm like a very ruthless cutter, like of my own work, not of myself, like of you know, like I will just like edit, like I will make big cuts, you know, like as I'm going. And so I get bored kind of easily. So if I'm like reading something for the millionth time and I'm like, oh, like, no, I will just take it out. And so for whatever reason, the things that remain are things that continue to like hold my attention or interest. And in the passage you just read, there is a kind of like hair comes up a lot throughout the book. So I probably felt that like there was something like resonant about having it there because it had occurred in the first section as well.
I also think that you will never hear an extract of your book read so beautifully.
It's wonderful.
Thank you so much. I feel like
your voice is ready to come up.
Mosquitoes.
It's
right?
Yeah. Little something.
It's gravitas, honey.
Okay.
It's gravitas.
We'll roll with that. So I hate when I'm laughing and then I have to go to a dark subject. It sounds like I'm laughing at that and I'm not. So obviously, whilst miscarriage is experienced by the couple as a whole, albeit in vastly different ways, Roger's perspective is kind of almost hidden from the reader. We just wanted to know, like, is there a reason that you wanted to kind of omit his experience, I guess?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's a really fair, good question. I think that I just wanted to go so deeply into this one person's mind. And I think that she's in a state where she's not really able to feel connected to other people. And so I think like she's not really able to imagine his experience. And so like the book isn't really able to imagine that experience either. I mean, I think that one of the results of it, and this is something that my husband actually noticed before I did, was that the book is almost all women. So like Raj is there in a kind of like perfunctory way, one might say, like, and then like it's her friend, it's her former mentor, it's her mother's adopted daughter mentee, it's her two therapists. It's just like this, like all of these women are in the book. And that wasn't actually something that I thought about ahead of time, but when I read it as a whole, when it was finished, I was like, oh, that makes sense. This is really a book about like women relating to other women, and Dorothe kind of like seeking and withholding and, you know, attempting to get care and then denying care from other women. It's like, for whatever reason, the male partner isn't the person that she wants to get that from.
I think that leads straight on to my question about female friendships and how they are explored throughout the novel, particularly that of Dorothy and Gabby. And I just wanted you really to just elaborate a little bit more on how you came to write their relationship and the process of writing their relationship, really.
So Dorothy has this best friend called Gabby. We're told that they're best friends, and I think that that's true. Like I think some people have read the book and say like, oh, this is a horrible friendship, it's not a real friendship. And I'm actually like, in my position, and like, you know, you can have your own interpretation, but my position is like, no, these people are best friends. And but one of them, Dorothy, feels very like distant and removed and is like having a hard time. And that hard time is like ricocheting through this friendship. So Gabby is a frustrating friend for Dorothy. I think we all know what it's like to have like a close friend that we both like love and maybe kind of hate at the same time, you know, like Gabby is very my host just exchanged an amazing glance. I wish everyone could see it. Gabby is very wealthy. Gabby has inherited wealth, right? And so the book kind of is setting up a comparison between Dorothy's like relative privilege and Gabby's like extreme privilege. So Gabby has this inherited wealth. She has a baby. She is a kind of professional dilettante, and she's found a lot of like identity in motherhood. And so I think that you're meant to see there's maybe these two people are drifting apart like in a more profound way, or maybe it's just that like Dorothy not telling this thing to Gabby is creating a rift. Maybe, I mean, I think one of the ways that I've sort of understood Dorothy's character is that she's seeking privacy, and she's trying to understand like how she can get privacy. And, you know, like not telling people something is one of the main ways that you get privacy. You know, like literally, what does it mean to keep something private? And like, is she hurting herself, or is she actually trying to like have boundaries or self-definition, not wanting to give this away to everyone, but wanting to like hold on to it? It's like, I mean, the idea of like a keeping, right? She's like keeping it to herself. So the friendship is like meant to be kind of like funny, like they have some like good banter and they're clearly like very comfortable with each other, but there's also all this like misunderstanding. And
I think the way that I would describe them, the way that for me they came across as best friends was when Gabby and Dorothy were texting, and she says, I think I'm hyperventilating. And she's like, I'm hyperventilating. She's like, what does hyperventing feel like? And Dorothy's like, I think it's just breathing really fast. Like, and it's just like, yeah. She's not like, why hyperventilating? Or, you know, like, breathe. So it's just like, yeah, we're better than you are.
I loved their exchanges over text. I thought they were hilarious. I think they were one of my favorite bits.
I mean, that's how so many of our friendships take place now, is these like sort of endless conversations that have like kind of no beginning but also no end, and you're always kind of in and out of them, and they're like distracting but they're also really important. And like, I think, you know, it's hard to manage them. And like, I do think, you know, at the end of the book, Dorothy tries to be a good friend to Gabby, and like it's sort of like her attempt to like have intimacy. Like she does want to have intimacy with Gabby. She wants to be there. Like she wants to be a good friend, but like she's just having a really hard time. And she just like doesn't really know how to talk about this thing that she's been experiencing. And she doesn't feel like she can talk about it with anyone.
So it's she definitely didn't want to speak to Gabby about it. It's not something, no.
But I mean, she doesn't talk to anyone about it, you know? Like I think she just doesn't really know. She doesn't really know how.
Because I'm always curious when characters kind of hold back from revealing something to someone. I always wonder if it's like, you know, they definitely don't want to say anything, or whether it's like they really wish they could but then hold back.
Oh, I see what you're saying. I mean? I think it's both. I think it's always both. I think you always kind of like both want to say it and don't want to say it, you know, or like are hoping that someone will guess, but also don't want them to ever know.
I feel like Dorothy was trying to control her experience and something like miscarriage, you can't control any of it. And so I feel like that was part of it. Like, I can control who I speak to, I can control who I tell, because I haven't got any control over what's happening to me.
I think that's really right, actually. I'm very persuaded by that.
Well, there you go.
Yeah.
So another question we want to ask, so obviously Dorothy is an English professor, but it's called, I learned this today, that it's an adjunct doesn't mean, is it adjunct? Is that how you say it? It doesn't mean the same as an English professor. Is it almost like a temp English professor?
Yeah. So this is I don't think the UK has this,
No,
right? And so there's something about the book that like doesn't, it's like kind of a foreign concept.
We call it a supply teacher, don't we? Is that the same thing? A substitute,
a supply teacher.
Yeah, supply teacher.
So in the US, like there's tenure track jobs, and basically if you get a tenure track job over time, the idea is that you will have a permanent position that you basically can't be fired from, right? And so the academic marketplace is sort of set up for people to compete to get these tenure track positions. Right. And then there are adjunct positions, which are on contracts that can be temporary and may or may not be renewed. So the idea is that Dorothy is just sort of like teaching these classes for which she is underpaid. She doesn't get health benefits. So she's like a freelance professor, basically. And so and she doesn't know, like how long, you can't really support yourself forever doing that. And so her question is kind of like, at what point am I going to just leave this entire career and do something different?
Yeah. And she's at that kind of I did listen to you on another podcast today where you were speaking about the fact that she's at that age in life where you kind of expect to have everything kind of stereotypically, maybe society's expectations expect that by this specific age you're going to have X, Y, and Z complete. And she kind of doesn't have that. And I guess, like you were saying about miscarriage means, it's the control being kind of taken away from you. We don't have any control around that. I think the element of control is almost stripped away from her in a lot of different elements in her life, isn't it? Which I found really interesting, and I really liked that you explored that. Yeah, there wasn't really a question in that. It was just
it's interesting though. I'm really intrigued at the differences between the UK and US academic situations, and how this whole kind of category of worker doesn't really exist in the same way.
So my actual question was, with her being an English professor, she clearly has this huge passion for literature, which definitely comes through throughout the book. And there are a lot of nods to famous works of literature. There's nods to Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. There's the Ancient Mariner. And we were just curious, like, why did you choose these works specifically? Was there a reason? Or
it's funny. I don't know if there was a reason. I mean, I think that probably the truest answer is just that like those are things that like I was interested in. So Dorothy thinks a lot about the Magic Mountain, and like I was reading the Magic Mountain while reading this book. So I was like, I'm also totally thinking about the Magic Mountain. And actually there's a kind of way in which the book is like secretly talking back to the Magic Mountain. So like there's like the scene with the sonogram is sort of like a comment on the scene in the Magic Mountain when Hans Castorp gets his hand x-rayed, and then the karaoke scene in my book is a sort of like comment on the gramophone scene in the Magic Mountain. So like I think that because I am like a critic, I often do see life through art or through literature, and so I did that for Dorothy as well. I mean, an interesting thing about Dorothy is like she seems like she should be more engaged with like feminist literature, but she's not. She's talking about like Thomas Mann and Kafka and like Coleridge, and there's something about that I kind of wondered if people would read this book and be like, something would seem fishy to them about that. But then I thought maybe it's kind of interesting. Maybe that's one of her problems. Like maybe she needs to read more works by women. I don't know. But I just like at a certain point you just have to kind of stop changing things too in a book, and you're just like, this is the idiosyncratic character I wrote, and
But
she's
also
not like a poster child for something.
We're not all women aren't all perfect feminists, and I really respect how many contemporary fiction writers, female authors, are writing these messy, complex women, and how we aren't all like, we aren't perfect, and we aren't perfect feminists.
Right.
You know, even like we like to think that, yeah,
I'm very perfect.
of course. Even though, you know, we like to believe that we're kind of doing the work, even though I really hate that phrase, but you know, we all like to think that we're kind of, you know, doing our research and educating ourselves, and you know, doing activism in some form. You know, we're not ticking every box. We are not the perfect person. And I think it's great that you explored all these issues within feminism, whilst also showing this character that's actually like not politically engaged with those types of things.
And like, I love that Kafka story that Dorothy is thinking about in the beginning of the book, the investigations of a dog. It's just such like a weird story. Like, I hope that people who read my book go back to that story and are like, what the fuck is going on in this story? It's crazy, you know?
I want to read that now.
I loved as well how she just completely forgets the actual plots of books, and so every time she goes to reteach them,
I loved that.
I need to read it again, and she like gets the whole experience again. And I was like, I love that fact. She's just like, she's a professor, but she's still like, I can't remember anything that happened.
Right. That's definitely how my brain works. I'm like, ooh, they got married at the end.
I love that.
So again, talking about like the themes of the book, there is like, I thought, quite a strong theological thread to the novel, and I was just wondering, what kind of role do you think that religion plays in Dorothy's life and in the novel itself?
I mean, I think that Dorothy is experiencing, so like what she's experiencing intellectually in the present of the novel is a kind of crisis of faith about the academy and about like being an English professor. But I think it's like there is a sort of past crisis that she went through that's like maybe implied or like hinted at, that was like the loss of her actual faith, right? And so she kind of, I think, like, you know, you're given this sense that she had this background, that she was very Christian, like she thinks about, you know, she kind of thinks about the apocalypse in terms that are like derived from Christianity. And, you know, she talks about the sort of pro-life stuff that she did as a child. And so there was already kind of like one loss of faith. And then, like, then she, my, like, what I would say is that then you can kind of see that then she turned to literature to kind of fill that gap or that hole. And then that also is proving to be something that she feels like she can't hold on to in the same way, or like there were fantasies about that are like crumbling for her. And so it's a kind of like double loss that she's going through.
Yeah, and I think that's felt really keenly, that sense of loss. And for me, the faith that we talk about in terms of Dorothy's faith and was so fascinating in comparison to what she was going through, and how it felt like she was still searching for something, for that meaning in her life. And I just thought it was just really wonderfully done. I really enjoyed is always a bad word, isn't it?
No, I think enjoyed is good. Yeah, I think it's something that, like, I don't know how you guys were raised, but I think like if you weren't really like raised with religion, I think it's hard to understand what it means to live without it, because it like, it is kind of like, I think, well, at least for me, like for some people, I think it's just a kind of like slam the door, like move on, turn the page. But I think if you do experience it as a loss, there's really nothing else that's like it. You know, there's really like nothing else that like fits in that exact place.
So I wasn't raised religiously, and I mean, I was christened, but we weren't, you know, made to go to church all the time or anything like that. It's never kind of been something I was taught to do. And so I read your novel, and whilst I was reading and had seen, you know, the references, I hadn't fully taken them in. And my friend was around yesterday, and I said, oh, you really need to like read this book. I'll lend it to you when I've done this interview. And she had a quick flick through, and she was raised Christian, and it's been, you know, a huge thing in her life. And she just read a couple of pages and she was like, God, there's a lot of references. And I was like, really? Like, okay, I need to pick this up and have another look back. And she was like, well, you're not going to pick up on that. Like,
right. Yeah, that's cool. That's cool. It's like there's like a code.
Yeah. Just cool. Interesting to see the kind of contrast between us. Like,
yeah, I did a lot of kind of like, oh, what's this, to my religious friends. Like, have you heard of this thing? And it was like, quite a bit from the Bible, from revelations in the Bible. And I was like, oh, that sounds interesting. And like asked my friend who's very religious, and was like, can you elaborate more about this? And then she started talking about it, and I was like, oh, I love that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that whole passage makes sense now.
Yeah.
Yeah, it gave us a whole new appreciation, I think, like for stuff that we just wouldn't have understood had it not
That's
been
cool.
for
It's nice because it opens up that discussion as well.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask, the Publishers Weekly described your book as the glorious love child of Atessa Moshfegh and Sally Rooney. But what we wanted to know is which writers have inspired you and your work and your writing style.
Well, I will say I really admire both Atessa Moshfegh and Sally Rooney. So like that was like, I was like, great.
What?
Send them the
book.
Yeah, I'd love to be a love child. I don't know. That's such a hard question. I mean, like I like have my whole life is books and reading. I will say that when I was writing the book, I did look a fair bit at Dorthe Nors. Do you know Dorthe Nors? And I also really like Dag Solstad. And like there's something, so I really recommend the book Shyness and Dignity by Dag Solstad. And like I just think about the way that he goes so deep into consciousness and into minutia. And there's a teacher in that book too. And like, so I definitely would like kind of like look at that book, Shyness and Dignity, and see like, how did he get from like one scene to the next, you know, like kind of like studying those moves a little bit.
You're going to note that down right now, aren't you?
I think as well, because I mean, tell me if I'm wrong, but because I think you think quite critically about books, you think quite about the structure of books, the way that novels are created, and technically, I think you look at that a lot. I find that fascinating when people do that, because I'm very much a reader of like, I'm not really an analytical reader.
Emotional.
I'm very emotional.
And
then I go back and then I can be objective about it. But I totally can't do that when I'm reading. I find it fascinating when people can think technically about books in that way. I really do.
Well, I mean, ideally one would do both, I think, you know, like you don't want to just be like a sort of algorithmic, you know, like but it does, I mean, it is kind of interesting to like study those moves and be like, okay, like, or like, how is time happening here? You know, because that's like one of the big questions about any novel. It's like, what do I do with time? Like, how many days years? Is this like a lifetime story? You know, does this all take place in 1 hour? Like it can really be anything. And so to kind of like get straight what your relationship to time is going to be is, I think, like one of the big places you have to start.
Fascinating. I found it fascinating. I'm a nerd. Finally, I would just like to ask you my final question, which is, what have you got in the pipeline? Please tell me you've got something cool coming up that I can read.
Oh, that's so nice. So I have written, there's a series of short essay books that are published by this press called Fireflies. And they're each one is like one essay book about a film. And they're doing one for every year of the 2000s. So amazing. I have one that's going to be coming out, I think probably not until the spring, but it's about Chantal Akerman's La Captive, which is her adaptation of Proust's The Prisoner. So it's like a short little book, but it's part of the Fireflies series.
Amazing.
Oh, well.
Yeah.
And as we usually forget, we just want to thank Europa Editions for sending us our copies of The Life of the Mind. And listeners, if you haven't read The Life of the Mind yet, go and order it right now. You won't regret it. It is available in all good bookstores, and it's published by Europa Editions. But finally, before we let you go, we always like to end on cultural recommendations. So Christine, is there anything that you've been enjoying recently? Please do let us know.
I have been listening to the You Must Remember This podcast. So it's Karina Longworth does this film podcast called You Must Remember This, and it's amazing. She basically like researches and then reads these incredibly brilliant essays. And the season that I'm listening to now is on the erotic 80s. So it's like films from the 1980s that sort of like push the envelope about sexuality in different ways. Oh, wow. And it's so fun, and it's like a great thing to listen to. So I recommend that.
Amazing. I love a podcast. I'm always looking for a new one, so I'm going to be all over that. Thank you. So yeah, thank you so much for coming on to A Pair of Bookends, Christine.
This was genuinely so fun. You guys are amazing. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much. Thank you. And listeners, please do rate, review and subscribe, as this helps to boost us in the charts. Can our listeners follow you anywhere, Christine? Not follow you in person. Let's not do that.
I have a Twitter. It's not very active, but I do have a Twitter. The name is Christine Smallwood.
Amazing.
There's another Christine Smallwood who's also a writer. She writes about food. So like if you get to that person, that's not me.
That's not you. Amazing. Oh, but yeah, thank you so much. And we hope you enjoyed this episode, listeners, and please stay tuned for our next book club pick. We don't sound like this. Bye-bye.
Bye.